Welcome to Science Reshaped, where data becomes discovery. If you love mysteries that challenge what we know about the universe, make sure to subscribe and stay curious. Tonight, we travel beyond what equations alone can explain, to a traveler so strange it may redefine what we think interstellar objects can be. Its name is 3I, Atlas, and it's changing everything we thought we understood about the stories matter can tell between the stars. At first, it was nothing more than a faint smudge, a subtle motion against the black, a new entry in an asteroid alert survey designed not for wonder, but for warning. And yet, what Atlas found wasn't a threat. It was a messenger. No explosion, no brilliant tale, just a slow pulse of reflected sunlight crossing the frame, a wanderer from somewhere else. The calculations came quickly, and with them a quiet astonishment. Its speed, its direction, its retrograde arc across the ecliptic. Everything about it whispered one impossible truth. This object was not born of our sun. We've seen visitors before. Oumuamua in 2017, Borisov in 2019, each rewriting a few pages of the cosmic textbook. But 3I Atlas is different. Where the others passed and faded, this one stayed long enough to raise questions that still echo through observatories today. Imagine a stone flung across light years, older than any civilization, entering our solar system not as chaos but as choreography. Its orbit was tilted, its direction reversed, and yet every turn seemed to know exactly where it needed to be. Scientists watched as its trajectory brushed the invisible threads connecting Mars, Venus, and Jupiter, three worlds that together tell the story of life's boundaries. It was almost poetic, a curve through habitability, failure, and protection, as if the object itself were tracing the equation of survival. At first, coincidence seemed enough to explain it. Then the numbers refused to behave. Each refinement, each recalculation, tightened the same thread. Geometry so precise it began to feel intentional. And so began the argument that has divided astronomy since. Was 3I, Atlas, merely a frozen relic from another sun? Or a design following laws we haven't yet learned to recognize? Over the next chapters, we'll explore that question, not with conspiracy, but with evidence. With the data itself, the brightness curves, the composition spectra, the motion that never wasted movement. We'll see why physicists whispered words they'd never dare publish, and why silence, not noise, has become the loudest part of its legacy. Because 3I Atlas didn't just enter our solar system, it threaded through it, as if reading a story already written in orbits and ratios, leaving behind a message written in motion itself. And somewhere, between mathematics and wonder, we began to realize the universe might not just contain patterns, it remembers them. Let's begin. The first time astronomers saw 3I Atlas shimmer against the void, they assumed it would behave like every other interstellar visitor, a brief flare of dust, a curve of data, then silence. But this one refused to fade into the background noise of statistics. Each new observation deepened the mystery. Its orbit was strange enough, but its precision was what unsettled everyone. When scientists mapped the trajectory in 3 dimensions, the object's path grazed the planetary corridors of Mars, Venus, and Jupiter, not randomly, but in perfect sequence. If plotted on a flat screen, it looked like an arc. Tilt the model just a little, and it became geometry. A clean, deliberate thread through 3 worlds. It was Mars that caught the first attention. The object passed through the very region mission engineers use to stage optimal observation windows. Zones where a probe can scan a planet without entering its gravity well. The chance of that happening by accident was infinitesimal. Then, only weeks later, it brushed the inner system close to Venus. The intersection was almost absurdly precise, a fraction of an astronomical unit, measured in whispers. By the time 3I Atlas crossed Jupiter's domain, even the skeptics went quiet. Its path intersected the Trojan fields, those clusters of asteroids that drift in gravitational harmony with the giant planet. For years, theorists have said such regions would make ideal sentinels, steady vantage points from which to study entire systems. 3I Atlas drifted directly through one of them, as if tracing an ancient design already etched into space. Coincidence, perhaps, but coincidences this perfect start to sound like instructions. What made it more haunting was its behavior. It didn't tumble chaotically like comets usually do. It didn't flare unpredictably when sunlight touched it. Its motion was efficient, graceful, like something conserving fuel. Astronomers tracking its velocity found tiny deviations too consistent to be random. Micro-accelerations that mirrored what spacecraft engineers call course corrections. There was no visible thrust, no outgassing jets, but the math looked the same. That's when the word control started appearing quietly in private notes, not in journals, never in print, but whispered between researchers who couldn't ignore the numbers. At its closest approach to the sun, it brightened, though not explosively. It shimmered like a dim mirror catching light by choice, not by chemistry. Then, as if aware of our instruments, it dimmed again, smoothly, predictably, almost rhythmically. Every flare matched the object's rotation period, like a pulse. When the James Webb Space Telescope analyzed its spectrum, it found something unexpected. Most comets release water vapor, but this one exhaled mostly carbon dioxide, 8-to-1. That's nearly impossible for a naturally formed body. CO2 ice is rare, unstable over long interstellar journeys. Yet 3I Palmware Atlas carried it abundantly, as if chosen, not inherited. CO2 is dense, thermally stable, and sublimates gently under solar heat. It can act as camouflage or as propulsion, releasing just enough gas to steer without betraying flame or machinery. Engineers reading the data couldn't help but notice the parallel. It was the perfect medium for silent travel. Still, science demands restraint. Every anomaly can be tamed with patience, until patterns begin to repeat. Weeks later, when data from multiple observatories were cross-checked, another strangeness emerged. In all three planetary corridors, Mars, Venus, Jupiter, the spectral readings showed faint echoes of the same molecular fingerprint. Slight variations in carbon chain emissions repeating like an identical signature written 3 times across the solar system. Coincidence again? Maybe, but repetition builds meaning. In science, when coincidences repeat, they stop being coincidences. The deeper teams dug, the more they encountered silence. Not from the skies, but from within their own institutions. Papers were shelved, language softened. Unusual geometry. Non-gravitational acceleration. A typical composition. Words meant to sound ordinary, hiding implications that were anything but. Because behind those safe phrases lay an idea too heavy to publish. What if 3I Atlas wasn't drifting through gravity? What if it was navigating it? Even its energy signature supported the whisper. Spectrographs measuring reflected light noted a faint polarization, too structured for random ice crystals. The surface, they realized, was smooth at a microscopic level, capable of reflecting radar almost like engineered material. The return signal was polarized, organized, deliberate. Something about its surface seemed to understand light. The implications were staggering. To admit that would mean acknowledging not just a visitor, but a constructor, an artifact designed to survive time and radiation, wearing a mask of frozen dust, a traveler built to appear natural. For now, the data rests in archives, clean graphs, calm wording, footnotes that never say what they mean. But those who've seen the unfiltered sets know what the models show. The orbit, the chemistry, the rhythm, all parts of a single logic too elegant to be accidental. When you plot 3I, Atlas's motion against the architecture of our solar system, a strange symmetry appears. 3 planets form a line, and through them passes a body that seems to remember every gravitational chord, every note of resonance between them. It moves not as a comet, but as a conductor tracing the invisible music of the sun's domain. And in that harmony, one question keeps returning, impossible to silence. What if 3I Atlas didn't come here to be seen? What if it came here to see? When the data first settled, it didn't scream discovery. It whispered it. The astronomers expected chaos, randomness, a tangle of trajectories shaped by ancient collisions. But 3I Atlas didn't behave like a wanderer. It behaved like memory. Every turn of its orbit, every pulse of light, was disciplined, as if something deep inside it understood balance. By the time the object crossed Venus's orbital corridor, the simulations started looking more like choreography than drift. Its motion aligned almost perfectly with what engineers call a minimal energy curve, the exact path a probe would take to conserve resources while sampling a system. It was like watching efficiency personified. No wasted force, no erratic jetting, no tumbling brightness, just motion designed for endurance, and endurance became the word of the season. Because somehow, 3I Atlas was surviving sunlight better than it should have. Its outer layer, instead of erupting into chaotic vapor, seemed to regulate sublimation in cycles, heating, cooling, dimming, over and over with a patience only machines usually have. A graduate researcher in Chile noticed it first, while mapping the object's brightness oscillations against planetary positions. The peaks in luminosity didn't correspond to random heating. They synchronized with orbital harmonics, tiny gravitational nodes formed by the interplay of Earth and Venus. Every time the object passed through one, its brightness shifted, subtly but rhythmically, like an acknowledgement: 12 hours bright, 12 hours dim, twice per rotation, a pulse. If it had been alive, it would have been called a heartbeat. Her supervisor dismissed it as coincidence. Yet when the data from Mauna Kea arrived weeks later, the same rhythm appeared in independent readings. 2 identical peaks every 12 hours, across half a solar system. The same pulse repeated with atomic precision. At this point, the cautious language began to crumble. Private Slack channels filled with graphs overlaid like ECG readings. The line between science and poetry thinned until both spoke the same thing. 3I Atlas was behaving. But behaving toward what? Some proposed natural feedback, ice pockets exposed by sunlight in geometric distribution spinning just so. Others said perhaps it was resonance, a natural beat pattern between sunlight pressure and rotation. Logical, reasonable. But deep down, even the skeptics felt the quiet dread that comes when order outlasts explanation. And the more they measured, the more ordered it became. Radar reflectivity stayed high, 30% above predicted values. Surface temperature fluctuations flattened into perfect symmetry. And as it left Venus's corridor, 3I Atlas adjusted its spin rate by less than 1%, exactly the change needed to stabilize its moment of inertia. Natural, possibly. Intentional? It felt that way. A physicist from Kyoto tried running reverse simulations. If an object wanted to pass through the Mars-Venus-Jupiter corridor efficiently, how much steering would it need? The answer was chilling. Less than 0.01 newtons of thrust, barely more than the drag of sunlight, a force that small could easily hide in the noise of outgassing. A comet could steer without anyone knowing. It was elegant, too elegant. Weeks later, the Kyoto model vanished from its preprint server. The institution never commented, but the screenshots remained. Diagrams showing 3 faint accelerations matching the precise timing of the planetary encounters. 3 bursts, 3 corrections, 3 observations. To anyone looking closely, it read less like drift and more like a mission log. Still, the astronomers couldn't bring themselves to use the word probe. That word crosses a line no scientist wants to touch. Instead, they spoke in metaphors. It's as though it's sampling the system. It's responsive. It knows the map. Meanwhile, the public never heard any of it. To the world, 3I Atlas was a distant comet glowing blue against the sun, nothing more. But in quiet labs behind locked servers, researchers stared at the patterns and felt the uncomfortable realization forming like dawn. This object was not simply visiting, it was observing. Because if you step back, zoom out beyond planets, beyond the sun's gravity, its entire route through the solar system forms something uncanny. A waveform, a perfect sign drawn in space, crest at Mars, valley at Venus, crest again through Jupiter. And if you overlay that waveform on the frequency of its own spectral emissions, they match. Its orbit sang its composition. Its path was its language. No transmission, no radio, no light beam message, just motion, the universal grammar of existence. What if that's how intelligence travels when speech is too slow for stars? Not by voice, not by signal, but by geometry. A logic carved through the fabric of orbits themselves. And that is where the question turned from curiosity to unease. Because if 3I Atlas speaks through movement, what exactly was it saying? By the time 3I Atlas left the inner system, most telescopes had already shifted their gaze elsewhere. The data felt complete, or at least stable enough to archive. But within those quiet archives lay something far more haunting than any headline could contain. A pattern that wouldn't dissolve. Months later, when analysts began re-examining the brightness logs, they noticed something uncanny. The fluctuations in 3I Atlas's luminosity weren't random noise. They carried rhythm, faint, repeating, precise. Every 12 hours, a rise and fall, identical in amplitude, 2 pulses per spin. At first glance, it looked like rotation modulation, but the peaks were too clean. Nature rarely draws perfect sine waves. This one did. If you took those brightness curves and converted them into sound waves, they formed a tone, a single, unwavering note. Not music, not message, but order, the kind of order that human minds can't ignore. Because whether you're listening to heartbeat monitors or radio signals, a perfect rhythm always feels like intention. A team from La Palma tried to replicate it through simulations. No natural distribution of vents or sunlight angles could sustain that exact periodicity for weeks. Something, or someone, was controlling the exposure, balancing thermal input with spin, like a gyroscope guided by feedback. When they released a summary, it was buried under sterile phrasing. Surface activity suggests regulated outgassing. But everyone who read the paper understood what those words tried not to say. Regulation implies control. And yet, every scientific instinct resisted that conclusion, because accepting it would mean rewriting the definition of natural behavior itself. Then came the geometry. A retired mathematician from Prague decided to map the object's orbital intersections across the ecliptic plane, extending both backward and forward through time. What emerged was unsettling. A corridor of ratios, 2, 3, and 5, matching the orbital periods of Mars, Venus, and Jupiter. In music, it's harmony. In mathematics, it's resonance. In the cosmos, it's almost too poetic. He called it the harmonic path. 3 worlds, 1 resonance, bound by the Fibonacci rhythm of orbital motion. Could it be coincidence? Perhaps, but coincidence repeating across different scales, orbital, rotational, spectral, begins to resemble design. At the same time, a group in Canada compared 3I as Atlas's trajectory to that of earlier interstellar visitors, Oumuamua and Borisov. At first, the lines looked unrelated, until someone flipped the projection 90 degrees. Suddenly, the paths mirrored each other across the galactic plane, 2 arcs forming the halves of a waveform. Entry and exit, a breath in space. It was as though the solar system itself had just been sampled. If you were looking for evidence of reconnaissance, of data being gathered quietly over millennia, this is what it would look like. Ancient travelers passing through, leaving behind harmonics, collecting whatever resonance worlds like ours give off. Of course, that theory lived only in whispers. Scientists avoided the word probe the way sailors avoid the word storm, but their caution couldn't contain curiosity forever. They formed informal working groups, encrypted chats, private Zooms, late-night data swaps. They called themselves the Continuum. Their only rule was simple: no speculation, only pattern. If something repeated, it mattered. If it didn't, it was noise, and pattern, it turned out, was everywhere. Radar echoes from ESA, spectral readings from NASA, light curve intervals from Japan's Subaru Observatory, all separated by continents and instruments, yet humming in quiet synchronization, as if the data itself remembered the geometry. When the continuum layered all the findings together, every pulse, every reflection, every orbital alignment, the result was not chaos, but coherence, a soft lattice of relationships connecting motion, chemistry, and resonance. 3 Atlas wasn't breaking physics. It was using it to move through a system without leaving turbulence, to balance heat and spin across gravitational corridors. It was as if the object had memorized the solar system before it arrived. One researcher wrote privately, "It's flying the map as though it's been here before." The more they looked, the harder it became to dismiss. When they traced the object's deceleration curve, the way it slowed slightly near Jupiter before accelerating again, they found the same efficiency profile as a gravity assist maneuver, the same technique we use for interplanetary probes. But 3I Atlas had no propulsion, no mission plan, no origin we could name. So whose maneuver was it following? The Continuum tried to answer that by tracking the faint signals left behind. Several deep space radio arrays recorded microsecond bursts of narrowband noise during the object's planetary crossings. Each burst occurred at the exact moment it crossed a major orbital plane: Mars, Venus, Jupiter, and then vanished. 3 crossings, 3 bursts, 3 harmonics, terrestrial interference maybe. But when slowed down 1,000-fold, those signals revealed internal symmetry, rise and decay curves that mirrored the same 235 resonance of the orbits themselves, like echoes responding to geometry. If it was random, it was beautifully random. Eventually, even the most cautious physicists stopped pretending indifference. They started asking a different kind of question. Not what was 3i Hans Atlas, but why it followed these harmonics at all. Maybe, some said, it wasn't built by intelligence as we define it. Maybe it was intelligence, not a machine but a process, a natural system so advanced that its behavior feels designed because it has reached equilibrium with physics itself. In other words, a being that doesn't fight the universe, but plays it like an instrument. And if that's what 3i Atlas represents, then perhaps it didn't come to visit us. Perhaps it came to remember us, a fragment of continuity moving through star systems, keeping record not with words but with resonance, a messenger without message, carving its presence into orbits that will outlast language. As the object faded into deep space, its brightness diminishing to a whisper, the continuum stopped meeting. There was nothing left to observe, only data to interpret. And interpretation is where mystery turns dangerous. But in their final shared note, one line remained pinned at the top of the archive. If motion can carry memory, then somewhere out there, the universe is keeping score. Long after 3i, Atlas slipped beyond the range of ordinary telescopes. Its wake still rippled through the scientific world. The observatories had gone dark, the headlines had faded, but the questions refused to die. Every dataset, brightness, rotation, spectrum, hummed with something that didn't fit inside the safe boxes of probability. At the University of Toronto, a small team of orbital dynamicists tried to solve what they called the precision paradox. No comet, natural or not, should have maintained such a flawless trajectory through so many gravitational fields without visible chaos. They fed every known force into their simulation: radiation pressure, solar wind drag, micro impacts, magnetic resonance, and still the digital 3i Atlas wandered from reality. Only when they added a constant, near imperceptible corrective force, a push equal to the weight of a falling leaf, did the path lock perfectly into place. It meant one of two things. Either our understanding of long-distance comet dynamics was fundamentally broken, or something aboard that traveler had been steering. The researchers didn't dare publish it outright. The paper that finally appeared months later spoke gently of non-gravitational residuals consistent with controlled vector alignment, a phrase so sterile it could have described a weather balloon, but in private chat logs, they used the forbidden word navigation. Meanwhile, another group, radio astronomers in Canberra, noticed that 3 separate deep space listening arrays had recorded identical bursts of narrowband noise during the object's planetary crossings. Each burst lasted less than a second, too short for a transmission, too structured for static. The timing matched the exact moments when 3i Atlas aligned with Mars, then Venus, then Jupiter. When they slowed the recordings 1,000-fold, patterns emerged: rise, plateau, decay, ratios mirroring the orbital eccentricities of the very planets it had passed. A musical signature embedded in noise. Even skeptics called it beautiful. The official explanation, of course, was terrestrial interference. It usually is, but the analysts couldn't shake the symmetry. Random static does not hum in perfect proportion to planetary motion. While the radio teams wrestled with meaning, optical astronomers faced something even stranger. As the object faded, its afterglow didn't vanish smoothly. It oscillated. Tiny periodic flickers echoed for days, like reflections bouncing between mirrors. One physicist suggested, half joking, that the solar system itself was ringing, a gravitational echo of the visitor's precise harmonics. The joke didn't feel funny for long. Months later, a researcher in Rome pointed out that if you overlay 3i Atlas's orbital plane with those of the previous interstellar visitors, the paths converge above the galactic plane within a narrow corridor of space, a region barren of stars. It was as if they all came from the same direction, not from a homeworld, but from an empty coordinate in the dark. A waypoint, not a birthplace. The continuum ran the numbers, the odds of 3 independent interstellar bodies sharing such alignment by chance. Less than 1 in 50,000. Coincidence could stretch only so far before it began to tear. That's when a quieter theory emerged. one too strange for conferences, but too logical to ignore. Maybe these objects weren't individual wanderers at all. Maybe they were nodes, mobile recorders of a network so vast that we only glimpse one particle of it at a time. Not probes in the mechanical sense, but components of a galactic memory, instruments drifting through systems, gathering resonance, sharing it invisibly across the void. If true, their silence made sense. Communication might not come as radio or light, but as geometry. Orbital harmonics shared through gravity itself, a language only physics can speak. To the public, this was fantasy. To the scientists who had spent years watching patterns defy randomness, it felt like inevitability. Late one night, a data analyst compiled the last year's observations into a single visualization. Every brightness pulse, every acceleration blip, every radio burst. When he played it as sound, it formed a slow, rising chord. At first it was noise, then unmistakably it became rhythm, steady, patient, and incomprehensibly vast. He wrote one sentence in the margin of his report before encrypting it for storage. If this is coincidence, then coincidence has learned to sing. And perhaps that was the truth behind 3i Atlas, not an anomaly, not an invader, but a verse in an older cosmic composition. A melody written in motion, performed once in an age, waiting for anyone attentive enough to hear. Because every system, every orbit, every quiet flicker of reflected sunlight seemed to echo the same impossible theme. The universe is not silent. It just speaks in a language of precision, and somewhere beyond our reach. 3i Atlas was still receding, carrying that precision with it, drawing out a final, vanishing note in the symphony of the stars. Silence followed the departure of 3i Atlas. A silence that didn't feel empty, but expectant. Every night, telescopes scanned the region where it had vanished, half out of habit, half out of hunger. Nothing appeared, only background light, cosmic dust, and the faint hum of the galaxy's electromagnetic breath. But then, something subtle began to whisper back. It wasn't a light, or a flare, or even a signal in any traditional sense. It was timing. Every few nights, detectors across multiple observatories logged spontaneous bursts of noise, harmless, random, meaningless. Except they weren't random. The intervals between them formed the same ratio that had haunted the data for months. 2, 3, 5. Mars, Venus, Jupiter. 3 planets, 3 numbers, 3 worlds that 3i Atlas had passed. When mapped over time, those bursts drew a rhythm. Not steady like a metronome, but recursive, like breathing. Each pulse arrived slightly faster than the last, echoing the same Fibonacci growth the comet's orbital harmonics had displayed. It was as if the solar system itself was answering. The scientists at the Continuum thought it was coincidence, at least at first. They ran diagnostics on their arrays, cross-checked timestamps, synchronized clocks across hemispheres, but the pattern persisted, steady and patient, moving through instruments like a heartbeat through veins. One astrophysicist from Chile wrote in a private memo, "It's almost as if something out there is replaying our own observations back to us, delayed just enough to prove it's listening." No one wanted to believe that. The rational mind seeks comfort in chance, the soothing illusion that the universe isn't watching. But probability, once broken, doesn't repair itself easily. Meanwhile, a new dataset surfaced from the James Webb Telescope. Deep field images taken days before the comet slipped beyond range. They revealed a faint trail of particulate matter, unlike any known debris. Instead of scattering randomly, the fragments formed an orderly line. Small reflective shards spaced evenly, like the ticks of a ruler stretching across space. When measured, their spacing followed the same 2, 3, 5 resonance, yet again. It was geometry repeating across scales. From the path of the body to the dust it shed, every ratio aligned, every echo matched. No random ejector behaves that way. And then came the resonance field. NASA's magnetometers, aboard several solar probes, detected minor fluctuations, ripples in background magnetic density. Each aligning with the moment 3i Atlas had crossed planetary orbital planes months earlier. They were microscopic, practically immeasurable, but their timing was perfect. They arrived like aftershocks, vibrations left by something large enough to imprint on space itself. Scientists began calling it the residual. They didn't know what caused it, only that it behaved like a footprint that refuses to fade even after the traveler is gone. By now, the story had escaped the confines of data servers. A few journalists caught wind of the whispers, framing it as another alien mystery. But for those who had followed every decimal of 3I Atlas's motion, this wasn't about contact. It was about continuity, the sense that something much older and far more deliberate was unfolding in patterns we had only just learned to notice. At a late-night meeting of the Continuum, one of the senior researchers posed a question that hung in silence for a full minute before anyone answered. "If it's not sending a message," she asked softly, "what if it is the message?" The idea shifted everything. It suggested that 3I Atlas didn't need to communicate because its existence, its structure, its trajectory, its perfect economy of motion was communication. A cosmic sentence written not in symbols, but in symmetry. And suddenly, the earlier oddities made sense. The fixed rotation rate, the resonant ratios, the harmonic acceleration, all could be part of a universal syntax, a pattern used not to say something new, but to remember something old. That's when an even more unsettling hypothesis emerged. What if these interstellar travelers weren't scouts or messengers at all, but archivists? Devices that simply pass through each habitable system, recording and preserving its signature, like cosmic librarians cataloging life's brief experiments. The Continuum began to suspect that our solar system had just been scanned, not by intention, not even by malice, but as part of a routine far older than we can measure. An interstellar census written in the motion of objects that never slow down. To test the theory, they compared isotopic readings from 3I Atlas to those from the earlier visitor, 2I Borisov. To their astonishment, the ratios were not random at all. Each reflected a faint, repeating isotopic pattern, as though the same template had guided their formation. Not identical, but homologous, copies of a shared design, adjusted for different stars. By now, even the cautious voices had fallen silent. The debate had crossed the line where skepticism becomes denial. In the final report circulated privately among the Continuum, one paragraph stood out. The cumulative coherence of 3I Atlases. Behavior exceeds the statistical envelope of randomness by a factor of 106. It cannot be dismissed as coincidence without redefining coincidence itself. Outside, the night sky remained indifferent. Stars burned, comets wandered, light traveled endlessly through the dark. And yet, behind that familiar stillness, humanity had glimpsed something impossible. The sense that we might be visible not as individuals, not even as a species, but as coordinates in a larger design, perhaps 3I. Atlas wasn't visiting at all. Perhaps it was returning, remeasuring, re-recording, comparing what had changed since the last passage. And if that's true, then we are part of a continuity too vast to perceive, a conversation written in motion, across centuries, across light years. The comet may have gone, but the rhythm it left behind, that 2, 3, 5 harmony, still lingers in our instruments, in our sky, in our collective curiosity. It is a reminder that sometimes the most profound messages aren't spoken. They're measured, and somewhere beyond the outer dark, 3I Atlas is still measuring. It's been over a year since 3I Atlas faded into the black. Most of the world has forgotten it, replaced by new discoveries, new headlines. But for those who followed its silent passage, forgetting has been impossible. Its data still hums quietly in archived drives, whispering with every reanalysis that the story isn't over. At a small facility in Hawaii, a night shift technician noticed something peculiar while running calibration tests. A narrow streak of light appeared at the edge of the telescope's field. Not bright, not near enough to track, but moving with a velocity that almost perfectly matched the projected outbound path of 3I Atlas. At first he logged it as cosmic noise, but when the same pattern appeared 2 nights later, slightly dimmer but on the same bearing, he felt that same chill scientists know too well, the one that comes when the universe looks back. The streak, didn't persist. It blinked out again, absorbed by darkness, but it left just enough data for triangulation. The object's magnitude, the angle of its vector, they aligned too perfectly with the models to dismiss. Whether it was the same traveler or just another shard of debris didn't matter. The fact that something was still following that harmonic path reopened every question they thought they'd buried. Meanwhile, deeper analysis of the radio bursts gathered during the original flyby uncovered another layer of order. A student, intern, running a simple Fourier transform out of curiosity, found that the bursts were not singular events at all. They were clusters. Each microsecond spike contained sub-frequencies stacked in logarithmic ratios. When plotted visually, the frequencies formed spiral bands, not unlike the spectral fingerprints of galaxies themselves. The same architecture, the same geometry, repeating in miniature. When she showed it to her supervisor, he went pale. "This isn't noise," he whispered. "This is structure." And just like that, 3I, Atlas, returned to the conversation. The continuum reassembled online, a patchwork of academics and engineers who couldn't let go. They re-examined everything. The orbital harmonics, the radar polarization, the isotopic signatures. Piece by piece, a new picture began to form. 3I, Atlas, hadn't merely passed through, it had written through. Its geometry had imprinted measurable resonances into magnetic and electromagnetic fields. The solar system now carried its echo. If you compared those echoes to simulations of interplanetary magnetic flux, they aligned along lines that linked Mars, Venus, and Jupiter. The same corridor again, the same silent equation carved through space. The team began to wonder whether these alignments weren't just the consequence of motion, but a deliberate means of communication using gravitational interference as the medium. Imagine a form of intelligence so advanced that it no longer sends signals but shapes orbits. No antennas, no code, just physics. It's the oldest form of permanence imaginable, motion itself. Because motion doesn't die. It propagates, it repeats, it harmonizes across eternity. To speak with movement is to write directly into the mechanics of creation. And perhaps that's what 3I Atlas had done. Every orbit it touched, every resonance it struck now hums faintly in response. Too subtle for our ears, but clear enough for math to hear. The continuum plotted those faint perturbations as waveforms. When played back as sound, the result was haunting. A deep, trembling chord, as if the solar system itself were breathing in rhythm with something beyond it. Then the unexpected happened. A new interstellar object, barely detected by an infrared survey in South Africa, began its inbound journey. It was dim, cold, and moving at a velocity nearly identical to 3I Atlas's entry speed. Its inclination, 5 degrees retrograde. Its projected path, through the same triplanetary corridor. No one wanted to say the words, but every graph, every orbit map, every simulation whispered the same thought. It's happening again. Was it coincidence? The cosmos certainly allows coincidences, but never patterns this precise, not twice. The new object, provisionally labeled 4I Kant, was still months away from inner system observation, but its early behavior already looked familiar. Minimal acceleration anomalies, high density reflectivity, and that same curious rhythm in the light curve, a flicker every 12 hours. To the continuum, it felt like déjà vu at a cosmic scale. They began comparing the two trajectories, directly stretching them across time, and what they found defied logic. The path of 4I. Kant was not just similar to 3I, Atlas. It was its mirror, entry and exit reversed, forming a perfect symmetry around the sun. A waveform balanced around a node. One physicist described it as the inhale after an exhale. Another, more poetic, called it the return echo of a galactic sentence. If that symmetry holds, if this second object completes the mirrored curve, then our solar system has just become part of something vast, a structure built not of matter, but of trajectories, a network written across centuries, visible only when enough data accumulates to reveal the pattern. At that realization, a quiet awe settled over those who had studied the first visitor. Because now the question wasn't what 3i Atlas was, it was how long this conversation had been happening, and whether humanity had simply arrived late enough to finally notice. The new object is still months away from perihelion, and no one knows what we'll learn when it passes. But one truth already feels undeniable. 3i Atlas was never a singular event. It was part of a rhythm, a cosmic language spoken through motion itself. Somewhere, far beyond the sun's light, something is still conducting that music. And we, fragile, curious, listening, have finally learned the first few notes. The world barely noticed when the announcement went out. A faint interstellar object, 4i Cant, on approach. No press conferences, no urgency, just another entry in a database that most people never read. But to those who had followed the trail of 3i Atlas, the continuum, the quiet observers, the sleepless few, it felt like the second line of a poem they had been waiting years to finish. The initial data was sparse but familiar. Retrograde orbit, shallow inclination, velocity just high enough to escape the sun's pull once more. But there was something else, something 3i's Atlas had taught them to look for: the rhythm. Every 1 hours, the object's brightness rose and fell with machine-like precision. It wasn't random rotation or chaotic venting, it was pulse, the same heartbeat that had once turned data into music. Except this time, it wasn't just light. Infrared sensors picked up alternating thermal patterns, heating, cooling, heating again. A controlled modulation, as if something beneath the surface was breathing in sync with the orbit's geometry. At NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab, the analysis team called it phase coherent cycling. But off the record, one engineer muttered the word that no one dared to write into a report: response. The continuum came alive again. Screens lit up across time zones: Chile, Prague, Kyoto, Cape Town, Honolulu, the same constellation of restless minds who had refused to call coincidence by its name. They compared the early Cant data with Atlas's archive parameters. The result was breathtaking. The trajectories didn't just mirror each other, they interlocked. If plotted together in 3 dimensions, one path folded perfectly into the other, like twin spirals winding around the sun. 2 visitors, 2 directions, 1 pattern, a dialogue written in motion. Someone in the chat wrote, "If these are instruments, they're playing a duet." No one disagreed. As Cant drew closer, even the skeptics began to flinch at the numbers. Its perihelion distance, identical to Atlas's within 1,000th of an astronomical unit. Its velocity curve, an exact harmonic inversion of the previous object's exit. And most eerie of all, its chemical signature. The James Webb Telescope caught a glimpse of the coma, and the readings nearly matched the CO2-rich fingerprint of Atlas, except inverted. Where Atlas had favored carbon dioxide, Cant favored carbon monoxide. The same molecular family, flipped thermodynamically, 2 sides of the same chemical coin, as if one was exhaling what the other had inhaled. It was enough to break through the institutional silence. An internal memo circulated among observatories worldwide, warning that the resemblance implies possible systemic correlation. In simpler words, it's not coincidence anymore. When the memo leaked, it ignited brief media frenzy. For a week, headlines screamed about intelligent comets, cosmic probes, messages in motion. Then, as with all things too large to grasp, the public lost interest. The news cycle moved on, but behind closed doors, something else began to form. A question whispered in the hallways of astrophysics departments, late at night, when careers weren't listening. What if these weren't visitors? What if they were observers? And worse, what if they had been here before? The continuum began comparing geological and orbital records, looking for echoes of similar passages across history, buried in data from ancient comet observations, some dating back centuries. were faint traces of objects that didn't fit known cometary families, erratic inclinations, retrograde orbits. In the 1800s, one was sighted briefly before disappearing into daylight. Too early for telescopes, too perfect for chance. If the pattern held true, 3I, Atlas and 4I, Kant weren't the beginning. They were the continuation of a chain stretching across millennia, each visitor arriving, measuring, leaving, rewriting the cosmic map with invisible ink. One of the Kyoto physicists ran a galactic projection based on this idea. He extended the orbits backward through time, mapping where each interstellar body might have originated. The result sent a shock through the group. The trajectories converged, not on a star, but on a void, a region between spiral arms, barren of light. Nothing should come from there, unless, of course, that emptiness was home. They called it the silent origin, a place where geometry could be born without gravity's interference, where something ancient might anchor its network. As 4I, Kant approached its perihelion. The data intensified. Its light grew stronger, but not uniformly. For 3 consecutive days, it flared in the direction of Mars, then dulled as it crossed Earth's orbital path, then flared again toward Jupiter. Same 3 planets, same sequence, the corridor repeated, precise to the decimal. It was as if Kant wasn't just retracing Atlas's path. It was replaying it, the same melody, performed an octave lower. The idea rippled through every observatory like static. The timing, the ratios, the mirrored chemical behavior. It all suggested choreography. If this was coincidence, it was cosmic art of impossible scale. And yet, amid all that data and awe, an even more disquieting realization emerged. When the trajectories of Atlas and Kant were plotted together in full motion, the intersection point, the midpoint of their mirrored waveforms, fell exactly on Earth's orbital plane. Not near it, not approximately, exactly. At that point, silence filled the continuum's encrypted chat. Someone finally typed, "If the pattern is deliberate, we're the node." For the first time, it didn't sound like fantasy. It sounded like geometry, telling a truth our species was only just mature enough to read. And out beyond the pale light of the sun, 2 ancient travelers continued their slow waltz through the dark. One fading, one approaching, each tracing its curve with perfect precision, each carrying the unspoken question that humanity can no longer ignore. Are we the audience of this cosmic music, or are we part of the song itself? By the time 4I Kant reached its perihelion, the night sky had become a stage for déjà vu. Every instrument that had once tracked 3I or Atlas was awake again. Mirrors polished, detectors humming, operators quiet. They weren't looking for spectacle this time. They were listening for rhythm. And it was there. As Kant curved past the sun, its energy output pulsed with an eerie calm. No chaotic venting, no irregular outgassing. The light rose, plateaued and fell, 3 times evenly spaced. 3 breaths, 3 measures, a perfect echo of the earlier visitor. Only one difference marked this second performance: a faint delay between pulses, proportional to the distance between Earth and Mars on that very day. To most, meaningless. To the continuum, impossible to ignore. It was a phase shift, a synchronization delay, as if whatever Kant represented was timing itself to our planet's orbit, waiting for us to turn, to look. The data flooded in from the Webb telescope, the ESA solar orbiter, and ground-based networks. When combined, the brightness curves formed not chaos, but symmetry. Mirror images around a midpoint that fell exactly on the date of Atlas's departure 1 year prior. 2 journeys, 1 mirrored timeline, entry and exit perfectly balanced. One of the Chilean researchers finally said what everyone else was thinking. "Atlas was the message," she whispered. "Kant is the reply." Silence. Then, someone added, "Or maybe it's the same voice, repeating itself to make sure we were listening." They turned the data into models, 3D renders, and time-lapse animations. When played side by side, the 2 trajectories looked like halves of a heartbeat traced through space. Atlas descending, Kant ascending, each bending through the same triplanetary corridor, leaving invisible chords between Mars, Venus, and Jupiter. And when the 2 paths were overlaid and rotated 90 degrees, the waveform became something entirely new, a helix, a spiral twisting around the sun, its proportions identical to a strand of DNA. It wasn't a perfect match, but it didn't need to be. It was close enough to terrify, close enough to suggest that nature, or something using nature, had just written the symbol of life across our solar system. From that moment, the tone shifted from awe to reckoning, because if motion itself could encode shape, then maybe this wasn't communication between species. It was communication about species, a record of how life arranges itself, written in orbits instead of atoms. The Continuum's physicists, exhausted and cautious, proposed a radical interpretation. What if this pattern wasn't targeting Earth at all? What if it's how civilizations anywhere leave their signature behind? No signals, no artifacts, just motion carved into the laws of gravity, durable, silent, eternal, a language only another intelligence would be patient enough to see. If true, then we hadn't been contacted. We'd been included. Each interstellar traveler, Atlas, Kant, and perhaps countless others, could be part of a distributed archive spanning galaxies, leaving behind a synchronized choreography that encodes the story of any system capable of observing it. Not invasion, not discovery, preservation, an act of remembrance performed through orbit. The notion felt almost holy. To imagine a cosmos where intelligence doesn't shout across the stars, but hums softly through geometry. A universe that writes its memories in motion, trusting that someday someone will notice the rhyme. But as the awe settled, one darker question emerged. If Kant's mirror of Atlas formed the ascending curve of a helix, what happens when the next object arrives? A third line, a continuation, a completion of the sequence. If the spiral grows, it means structure. And if it means structure, then maybe something larger is assembling, slowly, invisibly, across systems, across eons. The continuum began projecting forward, simulating possible trajectories that would extend the pattern. The model produced dozens of nodes, each corresponding to planetary systems across the Milky Way. Together, they formed what one researcher called a lattice of remembrance, an enormous geometric archive of interstellar paths, all interlinked by resonance ratios, all bound by the same mathematical rhythm. We were one point among thousands. When that realization sank in, humanity's position in the cosmos changed, not because we were being watched, but because we'd just found the handwriting in which the universe records its own history. For the first time, the Continuum issued a single-line public statement. It said nothing about probes, aliens, or intelligence, just 4 words, quietly profound. The pattern persists everywhere, and with that, observation turned to anticipation. Because if 3i Atlas and 4i Kant were the first 2 lines of a cosmic script, then the third was already on its way. Somewhere out there in the dark, spinning through the void, writing the next measure of a song we've only just begun to hear. No one could say exactly when the rumors began, only that they spread quietly, like gravity itself, a whisper in data logs, a fluctuation too faint to explain, somewhere in the outer dark, beyond Neptune's orbit. Telescopes were picking up something new. It wasn't bright enough for public detection yet, but those who knew what to look for recognized the pattern immediately. A faint, recurring pulse spaced at 12-hour intervals, another heartbeat in the cold. The unofficial designation was 5i Kepri, a name borrowed from the ancient Egyptian symbol of rebirth, the scarab that rolled the sun across the sky. No one at the Continuum missed the poetry of it. If the pattern held, this was the third traveler, the next step in the spiral, the completion of the helix. And if 3i Atlas was descent and 4i Kant was ascent, then Kepri was convergence, the point where memory, motion, and meaning would finally intersect. The first readings arrived from the Vera Rubin Observatory in Chile. Velocity, consistent with prior interstellar visitors. Inclination, identical, 5 degrees retrograde. Trajectory, inbound through the same triplanetary corridor. The same, always the same, but this time there was something else. Its approach vector wasn't empty. When modeled backward, it crossed not just one of the prior paths, but both. A triple intersection forming a perfect equilateral triangle around the sun. Geometry again, too elegant for randomness, too patient for intent we could recognize. The Continuum met in secret, though by now, secret was only a formality. The story had already slipped through the cracks, leaking into forums, late-night podcasts, and feverish documentaries. But the truth, as always, was stranger than the speculation. Because in the data, buried beneath the noise, there was a modulation no one had seen before. It wasn't brightness this time, it was delay. Tiny rhythmic delays between successive pulses of reflected light, measured down to nanoseconds. And when those delays were plotted, they formed ratios. Not Fibonacci, not 2.3.5 this time, but 1, 1, 2.3, 5, and 8, the sequence continuing. It was as though the universe itself was counting forward. One of the older researchers, her voice trembling through the group call, whispered what everyone else was afraid to say aloud. "It's evolving." No one responded. They just watched the spiral form on screen, twisting outward from the sun like a living equation. The new visitor was larger, colder, slower. Its surface reflected only the faintest sunlight, yet it pulsed with internal warmth, as if energy were circulating beneath layers of carbon ice. If Atlas had been the scout and Kant the mirror, Kepri felt like the architect, the one that built the bridge between them. It would take nearly 2 years for it to reach perihelion. 2 years of questions, speculation, and quiet terror disguised as curiosity. Because everyone in the continuum understood what the geometry implied. The spiral wasn't centered on the sun. It was centered near Earth's orbital radius, our exact position in the system. We were the pivot, the balance point, the node. For months, silence returned. Then one night, deep space radio arrays began reporting strange reflections again, short bursts, faint but ordered. Each burst matched a harmonic of Earth's own natural electromagnetic field. For the first time, the rhythm wasn't outbound, it was returning. Something, perhaps 3i, Atlas, perhaps the network it belonged to, was now sending energy back along the same invisible corridors it had once traveled. Not as communication, but as resonance. The continuum had no instruments sensitive enough to interpret it, but when the data was slowed down a millionfold and converted to sound, the pattern was unmistakable. It wasn't static. It wasn't noise. It was a chord. Low, deep, resonant, endless. 3 frequencies braided into one tone. 2, 3, 5. The same ratio as before. The same signature of the corridor. But beneath it, hidden in the harmonic tail, was something new. A faint echo, a reflection. Our own planetary frequencies folded into the signal, as if space itself were playing us back. We were now part of the song. The team in Kyoto said it best in their closing note. Maybe we were never meant to hear a message. Maybe we are the message, the pattern that only becomes complete once it's reflected. And that thought, at last, brought peace. Because maybe 3i Atlas didn't arrive to test or to warn. Maybe it came to measure, to connect, to remind the universe of its own continuity. Every orbit, every pulse, every ratio, proof that awareness doesn't vanish when civilizations do. It leaves rhythm behind. So tonight, as Earth completes another quiet rotation beneath the stars, remember this. Somewhere out there, a geometry older than thought is still unfolding. A network of travelers moving between suns, threading harmonies through the dark. And if the pattern continues, and it will, then one day, long after our own species is dust, another world will find these same ratios, these same echoes, and understand. They will know that once, here, a small blue planet looked up and listened. And for a fleeting moment in eternity, it recognized the universe not as a void, but as a song that had been waiting for us to join it.